Welcome to Brooks River in Katmai National Park, Alaska. My name is Mike FITZ with explore.org, and welcome to our play-by-play. It is October 4, 2021. We're in the midst of Fat Bear Week, and we're talking fat bears. My co-host today is Ranger Naomi Boak from Katmai National Park. Ranger Naomi, how are you today?
I'm very well. All I can think about are fat bears, and we have some here.
Right. I think a lot of us have fat bears on the brain this week, and we're excited to join you and share this live footage from Brooks River in Katmai National Park, Alaska. Neither one of us are at the river right now, so we're connecting remotely and watching the webcams along with you. But during today's broadcast, we're going to try to talk about the behavior of the bears, identify some of the bears that we'll see on the camera, and of course, talk about the ecology and behavior of the animals, as well as maybe the salmon that are utilizing the area as well. We not only will be looking at the Brooks Falls camera where you're seeing these two bears at right now, but we'll also be cutting to a couple of other locations, including a surprise location that maybe that we haven't included in our play-by-play broadcasts so far this year. That happens to be Dumpling Mountain. So we'll be up there later on in the broadcast, and we'll also cut down to one of our lower river cameras, which I can promise you gives us a better view than what we're seeing right now. So our camera operators are working hard to look for bears in the lower river right now. So we'll be going in between those different cameras throughout the day. Perhaps before we get to the specifics of what we're seeing on the camera, though, let's introduce Brooks River. I know we always have a few new people joining us for the broadcast, so thank you for that. If you're wondering where Brooks River and Katmai National Park are located, it's about 300 miles southwest of Anchorage, Alaska, and the northern portion of the Alaska Peninsula. And Brooks River is bisected by Brooks Falls. The river itself is only about 1.5 miles long. And along with our webcam partner, the National Park Service, explore.org hosts and maintains several webcams at Brooks River. And the signal from those webcams is sent wirelessly to the top of Dumpling Mountain, where there's 2 radio repeaters, and then those hop the signal to the small town of King Salmon, about 30 miles away. Going back to the river, though, just to give you a bit of a more detailed view of what we'll see. Again, we'll be looking at the Brooks Falls camera on the left side of this satellite image, and then the Riverwatch camera, which is starred near the river mouth, and then also the Dumpling Mountain camera, which isn't on this map. The Dumpling Mountain cam is probably about 2 straight line miles from Brooks Falls. We also have a few questions that we might try to answer later in the broadcast that were submitted in advance using Ask Your Bear Cam question. So if you want to ask us questions in advance, please drop those questions into this forum. You can find a link for that in the featured comment below the live camera feed. And I look forward to reading those questions. I try to answer as many as I can throughout the summertime. And thank you for everyone who has submitted questions so far this year. But Naomi, we're looking at Brooks Falls here. We're looking at 2 pretty fat looking bears. But we're in the midst of a Fat Bear Week. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the tournament and how people can participate?
Yeah, well, Fat Bear Week is a week where you all get to pick your favorite fattest bears. And it's a single elimination tournament like March Madness. And here you see the bracket that we created, and it's been very competitive this year, and with a few surprises, I'd say, Mike. Wouldn't you?
Oh, absolutely. So definitely some wins that I hadn't anticipated, but that happens every year, even with no matter how good I think my picks are, there's always a bit of a surprise. And you can vote right now on fatbearweek.org. This is how the tournament has played itself out so far. So 151 Walker is in the finals, and there's a good reason for that. I mean, he is a bulb of a brown bear, so looking really good, really healthy at this time of the year. He is awaiting the winner of today's matchup between 480 Otis and number 812. Naomi, why don't you talk a little bit about 812 and his story so far this year?
Yeah, well, 812 is a young adult bear, and he is the son of bear 402, who is probably the most prolific sow on the river. She's had 7 litters, and this bear is, I mean, what a terrific bear. He is so big for his age. He's only 6 years old, and look at him. He's right in front of us now at the river. Very diligent young bear. He's still fishing. He's not going to stop. And he's very fat and very big, like his mother. His mother gets that big, and he's got he. You see him now. He kind of licks his lips with his sticking his tongue out, and that's very characteristic of this young bear. So a young bear having to go up against our most experienced and well-known bear, bear 480. You want to talk a little bit about 480?
Absolutely. So we have a 6-year-old bear going up against one of the elder statesmen of Brooks River. So this is number 480, Otis. He's very recognizable. He is a beloved bear at Brooks River by many of the people who watch the webcams. Fairly recognizable because he has a floppy right ear, and he has a blonder patch of fur on his shoulder at this time of the year. And despite returning to Brooks River quite skinny this year, he has done a remarkable job of fattening up. And I think that's why voters chose him to be at least in the semifinals and maybe beyond. I think the chances right now are the polls for him are looking pretty good for him to reach the finals this year. He's about 26 years old. We don't know exactly how old Otis is, but he is definitely an older bear. And you know, because of that, he faces, I think, quite a few challenges in his day-to-day life. For example, when he's chewing food, we know that he's missing teeth. He has a harder time uh, chewing food compared to younger bears, especially when the salmon kind of fight back. Once he gets through like the outer skin, it seems like he wolfs down that fish pretty easily. But that's one of the ailments that older bears like 480 face. And Naomi, we actually saw on the webcams this weekend, I don't know if you saw this clip or not, but we saw 812 and Otis facing off in the far pool of Brooks Falls.
Yeah, a little. They were getting into the drama of Fat Bear Week. Yeah,
And this
eight
is, I
twelve
think, a fairly
likes. No, I was just saying 812 likes to be near Otis, but Otis has a space bubble.
each bear has its own bit of personal space that it likes to enforce. 812 is quite tolerant of the close proximity of other bears, but it looks like maybe in this situation, he was really trying to inform Otis, hey, I want this spot. Now, Otis has his back against the wall, literally speaking there. So he doesn't have really many places to go, but Otis is equivalent in size to 812. So maybe he felt a bit emboldened, like he didn't want to back off in that situation. So
I'm also gonna.
these are, competitors in Fat Bear Week, and they're real life competitors at the river.
Yeah, and I'm also going to say something about the challenges that 812 faces. I mean, Otis faces challenges of an older bear, but 812 faces the challenges of a younger bear, which is that, like in this instance, he is not always going to get his preferred fishing spot. He would love to be where Otis is, but Otis is not going to let him do that. And 812 is a bear that really likes to fish the lip, and he was able to do some of that, but 128 Grazer really dominated the lip this year. So one of the challenges that 812 faced was, where am I going to fish? We've got these dominant bears taking over my favorite fishing spots.
It's interesting every year to see how the bears sort themselves in space and time at the waterfall, depending on what competition they're facing. So a younger bear like 812 who's trying to find space at the falls, but facing competition from older and larger bears. And then it's kind of like the opposite for Otis, who is an older bear facing a lot of competition from younger bears who are not cutting them any breaks. So Fat Bear Week is going on right now. You can go over to fatbearweek.org and cast your vote. This is a subjective competition, folks. So vote for the bear who you think is the fattest and most successful of the year. Right now, 812 versus 480 Otis. That is the matchup open. And tomorrow it'll be 151 Walker versus one of those Bears. So I'm looking forward to that final matchup tomorrow. I already voted today, but we have one more vote coming up. And Bears, of course, Naomi, we see 812 here in the foreground, maybe campaigning for people's vote. The bear in the background could be number 602. 602 is an interesting bear to watch. I don't really know a whole lot about him. He's one of those bears that the last several years has only showed up in the fall. So we don't see him in early summer. But he frequently sticks his face in the water, much more so than other bears that fish in that location. You won't see Otis sticking his face in the water nearly that much.
He's been very successful today, also doing that. And I wonder how because 602 is not really a bear I'm familiar with, and wondering how familiar he is with that spot using that kind of fishing technique when we really don't see the more seasoned bears in that spot use that kind of fishing technique. So it makes me question how much he actually fishes there.
I also wonder too if it's if his behavior is sort of reinforced. Each time he sticks his face in the water, sees a fish, and catches it, it tells him, "Hey, maybe I want to try this again." And now he's catching and eating another salmon that he just caught in the far pool right before the broadcast, maybe 5 minutes before we went live or something like that. He caught another fish in that exact same spot. So bears are creatures of habit. They realize, hey, if they can make a living pretty easily by being very patient, waiting for their food to come to them. And 602 is really showing how it's done right now.
And these bears are about the same age. They're both young adults. So that's interesting too, that they're here working hard, hungry all the time. They're in that sort of metabolic state of urgency that we call hyperphagia.
And these bears aren't the only ones that are working hard for their meals. Of course, bears in other parts of the river are doing so as well. Looks like a younger bear on our River Watch camera. This camera is about 3/4 of a mile downstream of Brooks Falls. So bears in this area are more or less seeking dead and dying salmon. Rather than the bears up at the falls are looking for fresher salmon that haven't spawned, haven't died yet. But down in the lower river, there's so many avenues of escape for salmon that bears are kind of looking for the weakest of the school of fish in the river right now. And that appears to be what this young bear is doing.
And I will note lots of ducks and gulls around, and we've been seeing diving ducks in front of the underwater cam, which I think has been a real bonus this year.
Yeah, I love to see that. I love to see the mergansers and goldeneyes diving in front of our underwater camera. So check that out when that camera is live. In fact, Naomi, somebody was asking, Pam actually asked us in advance, can you identify some of the birds? And just looking at, the camera right now, the majority of the gulls that you see at the river at this time of the year tend to be either glaucous wing gulls or mew gulls, but there's also a high component or a high percentage of Bonaparte's gulls, and they look kind of, if you're familiar with terns, they have a more tern-like appearance. They dive into the water more often, kind of like just diving for salmon eggs. A lot of common mergansers and some red-breasted mergansers at the river, and then also common goldeneyes are some of the more frequently seen birds along the river. Also look for bald eagles from time to time, especially on the edges of the river perched in the trees. So those are a few of the birds. We had another question, Naomi, about birds from Ellen. And this is a common question, but I think it's always one worth revisiting. Somebody was wondering, why don't bears eat the gulls?
Well, if you'd asked me 4 years ago if bears eat gulls, I would say no. But we have a bear who's an innovative eater and now has developed a taste for gulls. You'd think, well, the gulls aren't really bothering them. They're just getting scraps, and they can't be very meaty. And you've got all those feathers to work through to get to the protein that you want. So most of them don't eat the gulls. They just tolerate them because they really do wait for the bears to eat what they have and then get the scraps. But I don't know. Have you ever seen bears eat gulls before the last couple of years?
Not on a regular basis. I mean, it's pretty rare to see the bears taking or making the effort to hunt birds. Just because the bird, I think that, like you said, the birds don't have a lot of meat on them compared to a salmon. A dead salmon at this time of the year isn't swimming away, so you don't have to necessarily work very hard to catch that fish in comparison to chasing birds around who are very quick. So I think the bears recognize that for most of the time it's just not worth their effort. And the situation that we saw last year with the bear hunting a gull was pretty unique. I mean, it came up from behind on a large flock of gulls that was picking up salmon eggs on the bottom of the river and just kind of like lunged into the school, not targeting an individual gull, but just kind of like hoping that it would land on one. So that's its technique. We'll see if that situation develops in the future, whether that bear tries it again. But it was fascinating to
He
watch
did try it
overall.
again this year. He got two gulls on the beach. They weren't on the cams, but he did get two more gulls this year that we know of. So
All right. Well, he
he
has a taste for
very
poultry then.
yeah, I think he does now. So, but the other thing that we talk about is whether it's easier or more work or harder to do something. And the bears, they want to spend as little energy as possible because they need to keep those fat stores. And if they start running around and chasing gulls and using a lot of energy to eat, then they're going to lose the benefit of getting fat.
Exactly. Their currency is calories. That's how they make a living. And they're trying to build up a giant savings account right now in body fat before they go into their dens and start to hibernate and wait out the famine that accompanies winter in this area of Alaska. So the bear right now that we're looking at is doing a fishing technique or demonstrating a fishing technique that we have nicknamed snorkeling. Can't breathe underwater, of course, because it's a mammal. So it's just sticking its face in the water, looking for anything that can't swim away. And all of the slow moving areas of the lower river, the eddies, the side channels, any place where the river doesn't have a lot of energy are places that bears will frequently seek out at this time of the year, looking for dead and dying salmon that have kind of dropped out of the river current. And this camera is just wonderful to watch in the morning around sunrise, Naomi. And for me, and you, now that we're back on the East Coast, that's about noon Eastern time, maybe even a little bit later. But I encourage people to tune in at that time of the day because there often seems to be a ton of bears on the Riverwatch cam.
Yeah, and you might see Otis down there too. He likes to be there in the
The different
morning.
bear, exactly, yeah. But different bears like to use different places of the river depending on the time of the day, the time of the year. For instance, Brooks Falls is extremely popular with bears in July. Some bears will still try to fish the waterfall in September and October, but they typically uh, don't have the success rate at the falls that they do in July. So downstream is kind of where it's at this time of the year. Fairly large bear that's come into the picture now, Naomi.
Hmm.
Don't know if you're able to recognize that bear or not.
I am not. I might take a guess, but I'm going to let you guess.
Yeah, so I'm not quite sure. I'd like to maybe we'll get a better view from our camera operators. Thanks to our volunteer camera operators, all of you who help to curate the webcam experience and give everyone great views of these brown bears here. Uh, the bear that's standing downstream of the waterfall, kind of closest to the camera, I definitely can say with certainty that this is an adult. Not one of the largest adults that we have at the river, but certainly well filled in, doing well for itself this summer. And when you see this bear compared to some of the smaller bears, this what we call, or the independent juvenile bears, the ones that we call sub-adults, you can definitely tell that there's a difference in overall body size. The heads of the sub-adults also look I think a bit bigger in proportion to their bodies overall. And that's maybe a difference that we see with some of these bigger adult bears.
If you also look at the river, you can see there's some red coloring in the river, which means it's all those spawning salmon. It's a lot of red in that river.
Yeah, and sometimes it's difficult to see when you're watching the cameras just how full the river in this area can be with spawning fish. But when you're standing on the wildlife viewing platform at Brooks Falls, and especially when the light is right, and you can look down into the water and you see all of those fish and the bears just kind of ignoring most of them, it really does underscore the point that the bears are trying not to work very hard for their meals. They recognize which of the salmon are going to be easier to catch and which of the salmon are going to be more difficult to catch. And so and the more difficult salmon are going to be the one that the bears tend to ignore overall. And that's why we don't see a lot of bears chasing fish in the vicinity of the falls at this time of the year.
And the other thing that you can notice if the light is right is the salmon swimming away from the bears. And you can really see how difficult it would be in open space, and especially in the lower river, to be able to catch any salmon there, because they've been avoiding predators for their entire lives, and so they're pretty good at that. They're moving away from shadows and moving away from those bears, and so that's another thing to observe along the river.
The area of Brooks River, basically with downstream of Brooks Falls, within, let's say, a few hundred yards of Brooks Falls, going all the way upstream to its outlet, or excuse me, its beginning at Brooks or Lake Brooks, is just full of salmon at this time of the year. And now we're getting a better look at this bear. This maybe, oh boy, I don't know if I should venture a guess, because if I get it wrong, it might cause some confusion. But it has a 907 look to me, but I could be wrong about that. Well, I think we'll come back to this bear in just a little bit, because I want to show an example of what the river looks like underwater at this time of the year. This is footage that I recorded near the head of Lake Brooks, and it is just full of sockeye salmon. The salmon will compete, of course, the females will compete for preferred excuse me, nesting spots, and the males will compete for access to females. It's a beautiful scene under the water overall. And when the bears walk through the river, the salmon, as you mentioned, Naomi, just sort of part ways, and then they return to their spawning site, usually within a couple of minutes, sometimes less. That's one of the things that I was able to watch in time, standing at Brooks Falls and standing at downstream at the Riffles camera, is watching the bears moving through the river and seeing the salmon move out of the way, and then the salmon have certain maybe markings on them right now from the wear of spawning, so I can recognize a few of them individually for at least a day or so, and then I can watch for that same salmon to come right back. So the bears, even though they're moving through the water, don't seem to disturb the salmon from those spawning efforts all that much.
Yeah, the Riffles is a great place to watch that activity. And it's also fun to watch the bears try and catch the salmon there, and it's tough. It's tough. They swim away. So are you gonna guess 907 on this bear, Mike?
Well, that's my best guess at this moment in time. I'm sure in the cam viewers, if you have an alternative opinion or ID, you think I'm wrong about that, post those in the comments, because I always like to read the comments after the broadcast to see what people were thinking. So you can post that down there and help me identify these bears. We learn a lot from our webcam viewers, because you see many different things that we don't see when we're not online. So thanks to you for paying attention to these animals.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, I don't usually associate those light colored ears with 907, but they change color so much during the season. They're tricky, those bears.
Yeah, we can, I think, bring up these Fat Bear Week photos once again to illustrate that. Looking at Walker, and how he's a bit more of a medium brown color in early summer when he's shedding. He still has kind of like Mickey Mouse shaped ears, I think, at both times of the year. But in the fall, he's a much darker furred bear. So not only do they change in body shape, but they also change in color, and that can be fairly dramatic with a lot of different bears. Otis, I think, is a great example of that too.
Yeah, I mean, 128 Grazer is another example. Very blonde, and then she becomes kind of dapple gray, and Divot goes from blonde to brunette. And so color is not a really good way to identify bears most of the time, except for maybe a bear like 435 Holly.
Yep. Very few of the bears seem to really have fur color from early summer to late summer that almost matches. Most of the time it does seem to darken from early summer to late summer as they grow in a new coat of fur. And 812, I think, is a bear that really uh, shows a tremendous difference in his appearance. Uh, a face on a bear like Otis is fairly recognizable, whether he's in fat form or skinny form. But 812, for me, it's always like in his face. That seems to really change. So I often have, when I see him in the fall, I have to take a second look compared to early summer because it does seem like he changes appearances quite remarkably.
Yeah. Well, their faces fatten up. I mean, as you can see here, his face looks really thin, and then it's got puffy cheeks.
So this is a good looking bear walking downstream at Brooks River um, right now. A lot of the very fat bears that we have at Brooks River, like 151 Walker, I mean, they sort of like set the curve uh, for how fat bears can get. So sometimes people will see another bear that looks thinner at this time of the year and be like, "Oh no, that one doesn't seem like it's doing well." And almost always it is doing quite well. It's just that the very very fat bears have skewed our perspective on how fat they can get. A bear like this in most other ecosystems would be considered to be quite fat. So this one is doing well for itself.
Yeah, and if you're standing near them, they look enormous. And the other thing we have to remember with younger bears is that they're growing not just out but up. So that's another challenge they have.
Yeah, that's something that 812 does. Something that Walker might be doing just a little bit, even though he's kind of in the prime of his life right now. That sort of like up and out growth rate sort of slows length and height wise as they reach their mid teens. Uh, but the younger bears are certainly doing that. So they're not only gaining that body fat that they need to survive, but they're also putting on height and length. Gaining size in that manner.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but I haven't really seen any bears that I'd feel concerned about this time of year. They seem healthy, even the subadults that we think of as smaller and maybe not gaining as much girth. I haven't seen what I consider a skinny bear.
I have not either, and that's actually a question that Susan brought up and submitted in advance. She has seen some thinner looking subadult bears, so she's wondering what happens to them if they don't have sufficient fat. And I would like to say, Susan, yeah, a lot of the younger bears don't look like they have as much fat reserves as some of the larger bears that we've been seeing, utilizing the falls. But again, consider how the really fat bears skew our perspective. But to get back to Susan's question specifically, what happens if they den without sufficient fat reserves? Well, they might come out of the den early if they burn through it. Because they don't want to be metabolizing muscle. They need that muscle to stay healthy and strong when they exit the den. Fat is really like a clean burning fuel for them. So that's what they're trying to rely on inside of the den. But if a bear burns through its fat reserves, maybe it'll come out early. Maybe not, though, because hibernation is a bear's single best energy conservation strategy in the winter. There's nothing else it can do to save energy more than hibernate. So they'll try to stay in their dens really as long as they can. But if worse came to worse, I think sometimes the bear might come out of the den and try to find some winter food sources. But that can be a last ditch effort for bears. We're about halfway through our broadcast right now, so I'd like to welcome everybody who's joining us today. My name is Mike FITZ with explore.org. I'm talking brown bears and salmon with my co-host Ranger Naomi Boak from Katmai National Park. And Naomi, we've been seeing some bears snorkeling in the lower river. We've been watching bears up at Brooks Falls. Maybe this is a good opportunity to head to the top of the mountain and talk a
Mm-hmm.
little bit about the scene from that perspective, because we haven't actually used one of these in our play-by-plays. This is not a static image, folks. This is actually live footage from the top of, or near the top of Dumpling Mountain from our Dumpling Mountain cam, and a really beautiful view and perspective on the river area itself. Naomi, do you want to talk our viewers through where Brooks River is from this perspective?
Yeah, well, we're seeing Naknek Lake, and on the left and on the right, Lake Brooks, and in between, the connection between those two places is the Brooks River, and it's just, you look at this, it's so stunning, and I think, we're watching the bears and watching them closely, but every once in a while, a cam op focuses on Mount Katolanak, or and which you see here, and it's just stunning. It's just so beautiful, and so it's another privilege that we have to have a camera like this and be able to really see the scale of the place.
That's something that really kind of blew me away the first time I went to Katmai, is the scale of the wildness. Seeing, this essentially roadless landscape where bears are free to go about their business. There's no fences or anything that corral them. There's very little, signs of human habitation and occupation across this landscape. So it is largely a wild space where bears have the room just to be bears. And it's remarkable how we pay so much attention to Brooks River in this wilderness landscape, because Brooks River is just a very small part of this overall landscape. And in fact, without the waterfall and the bears fishing here, I don't think we would be paying much attention to it, to tell you the truth, because it doesn't really have the spectacular nature of a lot of these other places, not like Mount Katolanak or the Valley of 10,000 Smokes, which is really just behind Mount Katolanak. Mount Katolanak is the mountain directly in the center of the frame on the horizon. The Valley of 10,000 Smokes is a volcanic feature created in 1912. And in the background of there, we'll look for our camera operators to maybe zoom in on Brooks River from Dumpling Mountain in a little bit later in the broadcast. But right now, we'll head back down to the river, see what our bears are doing. Because again, I think it's a little bit of a working hard on what they have been doing over the past several weeks. Again, snorkeling, looking for anything that can't swim away.
So happy that we still have the cams up at this time, because it really is a magical time of year. A lot of bears around working really hard. Mike, when do they really start to slow down? When does their metabolism change?
It could be right around this time of the year. I'm not sure. It probably varies from bear to bear, because not all bears go into hibernation at the same time. Adult males might not go into the den until December, for instance, and some of the pregnant females might go into the den towards the end of this month or early November. But the switch to that hibernation physiology doesn't happen quickly. It's a long, drawn-out process. It starts several weeks before they go into hibernation, and doesn't really complete until they're well within their dens, several weeks after they kind of say that's it for the year. And kind of an interesting interaction here, if you want to call it that, Naomi, between these two
Yeah.
younger bears at the river. They don't really seem to be minding the close proximity to one another. And there's a ton of space for bears to fish down here, so they don't need to be close to one another at all.
They're sort of behaving like siblings.
Yeah, sometimes
young.
we will see, yeah, we'll see sibling bears hanging out uh, for sometimes an entire summer. Sometimes they'll come back together and they'll greet one another like they're old friends.
I bet some of the cam viewers know who these bears are better than we do.
The younger bears are some of the more difficult bears to identify. So if you're feeling a little bit, uh, frustrated with not knowing who these younger bears are, hey, that's okay. Just because it's it's difficult at first, and sometimes we even get some of the younger bears mixed up with older cubs that belong to a mother. So, for example, there can be female bears with their cubs in this vicinity at this time of the year, and they're spread out because the older cubs are starting to express a lot more independence. They don't feel like they need to be right next to their mother, and then all of a sudden you'll see them come right back to their mother, and you'll be like, "Oh, I wasn't actually watching a subadult bear. I was watching a a 2.5-year old that was fishing on its own with mom in the vicinity."
And these guys are doing well. They've found some dead salmon there, and they're chewing away.
And I don't think we can spot them from Dumpling Mountain, but if you look closely, you might be able to take a look at a lot of those little dots that are moving. Uh, if you watch the camera closely, you can tell that they're bears moving back and forth. Again, looking to scavenge dead and dying salmon. The two that we were watching just a moment ago, if you're looking at the river itself, you see the bridge coming across the river. On the left-hand side of that bridge is a large platform, and those two younger bears are just kind of in front of that platform from our perspective here on on Dumpling Mountain. And then there's another bear swimming to the right of them, downstream of kind of like the crescent-shaped island that's in the middle of Brooks River. So this is a great view, Naomi. We've really seen this part of the river change significantly over the last several years.
Yeah, it's so different, and not not static over the years at all. There was that piece of land that was what we called the closed trail, which was actually an artifice. It was, in my understanding, was not naturally there, and that disappeared last year. And with a high water level, a lot of the islands are smaller, although the water level really has come down.
Yeah, and that's fairly typical for this time of the year too, as we saw earlier when we had that wide view from Dumpling Mountain. We saw a lot of snow in the mountains, so the runoff from glaciers has slowed down. It's not raining anymore; it's snowing. So a lot of the water that would otherwise have been filling up the Naknek Lake basin and raising the level in the lower river is not. It's much reduced right now. So the water level in the lower river is dropping at this time of the year, and maybe making some of those dead and dying salmon more accessible for the bears that like to scavenge fish in this area. So I encourage everyone to check out the Dumpling Mountain Cam from time to time. It's a beautiful view, great sunrise moments and sunset moments. And every once in a while, maybe you'll see a bear walk by. It's kind of a rare event to see a bear on the Dumpling Mountain Cam near the camera, but it does happen.
Yeah, it's a special treat, and maybe some ground squirrels.
We also have seen a wolverine on camera up there. I would love to see like a moose or a caribou walk by. That would be pretty rare. I mean, the tundra habitat way up on top of the mountain isn't great for those two species, but you never know. They do wander through that area rarely. I know I've seen at least one caribou track on Dumpling Mountain. I've seen a lot of moose tracks and scat up there. We've been
So,
talking this
so this.
whole time. Sorry, go ahead,
I was
Naomi.
just going to say that. I was just going to say that young bear found a really good spot because it's a place where the salmon could get caught. Right, not out in the open water, but on the edges there.
Yeah, I think bears learn to look in these places pretty methodically. Their activity patterns on the lower river can almost be a bit what looks like a bit chaotic and a bit random, and I'm sure there's some randomness to it. But they do learn like, hey, these shallower areas where there's tufts of grass and slow moving water, it does seem like they really do happen to know uh, that these are spots where dead and dying salmon collect. And now that we're getting a better look at these, I tend to suspect that, yeah, like you said earlier, Naomi, that these two could be siblings. We could be looking at a pair of cubs here with mother just fishing off camera.
Yeah, they are small, relatively speaking.
A lot of people do ask us at this time of the year if mothers and their cubs will go into the same den for the wintertime, and they certainly will. So some bear families probably have giant dens, but they're all tucked in there, pretty snugly. It probably helps them to conserve a little bit of energy when they're inside of the den, all on their own. And a little bit of this bear here, Naomi, taking in a different meal right now, not a salmon.
Getting some ash.
Yeah, it looks like it. You can see a plume of sort of muddy water, silty water around it right now. And this is a spot where we've been seeing bears digging into the earth because there's a layer of clay that's accessible to them in this spot, and that's weathered volcanic ash. It's about 6 inches deep or so. It's from the 1912 eruption of Nova Erupta volcano, and the bears eat it at this time of the year. We're not sure why. It could be because they're missing some micronutrients in their diet. It could be anti-diarrheal because their stool, their scat is very loose and runny at this time of the year. Some people have also speculated that maybe it helps to help rid their gut of parasites, but we don't really know that for sure. All that we know is that bears will eat earth from time to time, and that's a behavior called geophagy, if you want to add that to your vocabulary. I also wonder too, Naomi, if that's a behavior that bears learn from their mothers. Uh, Maybe they might have an instinct just to like sniff certain things out that might make their stomachs feel better overall. But sometimes you'll see mother bears doing that sort of thing, digging into the earth, and that ash is accessible in a lot of places. But it seems like sometimes that the like cubs won't pay attention to it until they see mom paying attention to it, and then they take it. Then they grab a few bites, and then we'll see them repeating that behavior later on, even when not prompted by mom.
So I wonder, I mean, it'd be interesting to know what similar kinds of behavior we might see in bears in other locations where there hasn't been a volcanic eruption.
I know that behavior has been documented in bears in Yellowstone and maybe also Kamchatka, if I remember correctly. But we definitely do see, the bears here may be behaving differently around food than bears in other ecosystems. There definitely are what can be described as matrilineal associations associated with food.
So we're gonna. I was gonna take a guess at that bear's ID, but I'm not going to now. You think that's the same bear that we saw at the falls? Those ears.
No, it's not. Sorry, I had to take a little bit of
Yeah.
a break to grab a drink of water there. My throat was getting scratchy from too much talking. But that bear's still up at the falls, the one we were uh, looking at earlier.
Okay.
So this is a
That
different bear,
was
but
weird.
using a bit of a table right now. This is also something that bears will do commonly at this time of the year. Again, bears are being efficient. They're being very patient. They're really trying to save energy, although we'll see them play fight and things like that. Um, being in the water is where they want to be. Almost all of their needs are met in the water at this time of the year. They're really, really well adapted to the cold water. So with their fat reserves, they don't seem to really get cold quickly. Their food is there. If they get thirsty, well, of course they can drink more water. So they got almost everything that they need in the water at this time of the year. The lower river is just like absolute perfect bear habitat for them.
During Fat Bear Week this week, a lot of people and reporters will ask, how we choose bears to be in Fat Bear Week, and one requirement is that we be able to get pictures of the bears when they're fat, and it's a very difficult task because they're in the water all the time, as you're saying. I mean, Otis will do this same behavior. He'll be in the lower river, he'll get a fish, and he won't come out of the water to eat it. He'll do exactly what this bear is doing.
And it's difficult to see how full the river is with bears at this time of the year. We're going to go back to our Dumpling Mountain camera, though. The view is a little bit blurry just because the camera is zoomed in about as far as it can go. So it's a bit pixelated. We can't really improve that too much. But the river is just full of bears. If you, again, watch, from the Dumpling Mountain cam, you'll see a lot of dots moving through the river. So this area experiences an extremely high density of bears at this time of the year. There can easily be 3 or 4 dozen, different bears utilizing the area at this time of the year. So this view is just downstream of Brooks Falls. The curve in the river that you're seeing is when the Brooks Falls camera is looking out downstream, as it is right now, where the river runs out of the camera's line of sight to the left. That's the area that we're looking at right now. That area is called the Cut Bank. And at this time of the year in the Cut Bank, Naomi, it seems like bears are doing a lot more scavenging than anything else. Though sometimes we'll chase after the livelier fish, but I don't think the behavior in this area, at least from what I've been able to observe, doesn't differ very much from what we see a little bit farther downstream in the lower river.
Right, it's pretty shallow there, so easier to scavenge there. Oh, and there's a bear in the background.
Yep, and that looks
there.
like Otis coming into view.
It does.
So Otis campaigning for the vote. He was doing that the other day as well. He is, again, a master at efficiency and patience. He loves to move very slowly through the river and scavenge salmon.
Yeah, he's been a camera hog this week. Nonstop campaigning.
Otis is such an experienced bear. He knows, where the best fishing spots are on the river. He doesn't have to investigate. He doesn't have to guess. Not like a younger bear who might be still kind of learning the tricks of the trade. Otis knows where to go, where to sit, when to lunge, when to wait for the fish to come to him. So again, it's when we're watching, a bear like him fish. I mean, it really is watching a bear who is a master at his craft.
Now, did he grow up on the river? I know most of his life has been on the river.
We don't know for sure whether he spent his cub years or his subadult years at the river, because when he was first identified in 2001, he was an older subadult bear or a young adult. So he's somewhere between 4 and 6 years old. He could have easily spent his younger years at the river itself, but the long-term bear monitoring study that identifies the bears at the river, the protocols switched around the year 2001. So the data, we can't look back in the data and say with certainty whether Otis was there or not. We just don't have record. No, at least since 2001, he's been using the river every year of his life since then. And he may have found a fish in there in the background because he paused for a bit of time You'll often see him just like sitting in one particular spot in the river and just gnawing on a salmon head. I couldn't do it. I couldn't stomach it. But for bears at this time of year, it definitely does seem like it's worth it. So in contrast to Otis, we'll look downstream at the lower river once again. A different bear moving through the same vicinity we saw that what looked to be that sibling pair moving through earlier, almost to the exact same spot that other bear was eating clay before. I'm not sure if it's going to try to eat any clay here or not, or it's just another example of how bears have learned that this is a place where salmon carcasses can accumulate in that shallow water.
Notice, we talk about some bears like 812 as bears that lick their lips a lot, they stick their tongues out. 856 does that. But I'm seeing a lot of bears do that this time of year. Is there something about the taste of that dead and dying salmon or something else that makes them do that?
I don't know. I don't know if that's something that's learned or if it's an acquired or excuse me, an inherited characteristic. That bear did just pick up what looked to be some pretty rotten pieces of salmon there, and wasn't worth that bear stomaching. When they're hungrier, they're going to eat those things, but right now they're being a bit more choosy, and it's been a challenge to follow some of these bears for our camera operator today for sure, because of the bears just constantly want to walk right under that platform. So thanks to our camera operator for giving us these views of the river itself. And we'll come back to the lower river camera in just a bit, but again, right now, just a great view looking downstream towards the cut bank downstream of Brooks Falls.
And I'm assuming Otis is in that similar spot because I'm seeing a lot of gulls over there. They like to follow him.
Yeah, it could be the gulls learn to target the bears, that not for food, but for scavenging opportunities. And then also you see a lot of gulls hitting the surface of the water, Naomi, and those gulls are bobbing for salmon eggs. There's a lot of free floating salmon eggs in the current at this time of the year. And the salmon eggs are just a little packet of fish oil. So they're super high in calories if you eat enough of them. So the gulls are getting really fat, not only on pieces of salmon flesh that the bears leave behind, but also the free eggs that are distributed in the stream. And those eggs could get kicked up by most of the time by the efforts of spawning salmon themselves. A female salmon might move into another female's territory and dig up some of the eggs that were previously deposited because she wants to bury her own eggs in that area, or some of the eggs during the spawning event just get thrown downstream, and that can happen frequently as well.
And so I'm assuming that's why we're seeing more diving ducks around the underwater camp, because they're diving for those salmon eggs.
I suspect that's the case. Yeah, that they're looking for salmon eggs. They're also going to be eating aquatic insects and things like that. And the salmon really are, we've mentioned it before, it's worth mentioning again, they are the keystone of this ecosystem. So they're not only providing the food that sustain this high density population of bears, but they're also supporting, so many other creatures in this area. So the birds, fish under the water, the diving ducks, aquatic insects. I mean, they are the keystone of this area. And without salmon, the Brooks River area would certainly be an ecologically impoverished place.
Now this bear, me, is exhibiting a characteristic which we see in most of the bears, which is just patience and persistence. And that's what it takes for them to be successful.
This is a good demonstration of that. I mean, this bear has been there long before we started the broadcast today. So at least probably an hour and 15 or 20 minutes. I'm not sure how long this bear has been sitting and standing in the far pool, but it's been rewarded several times. And again, if you're a bear, you're working hard for your calories and trying to get fat at this time of the year. if your food's going to come to you, hey, you got to take advantage of that situation. So sometimes people will look at bears and be like, well, they need to, be moving around more. Why aren't they fishing more? It's because, this is the best strategy for them. If they can find those productive fishing spots to sit for their meals, they're going to do it. Well, with just a few minutes left in our broadcast, Naomi, maybe we should take one final opportunity to talk about Fat Bear Week. We started out with 12 bears in our bracket. We are currently down to just 3 bears, with Otis in the lead in our second semifinal matchup today. So chances are that 480 Otis is going to the finals to face off against 151 Walker. And I think this is going to be really like a big clash of the Titans. Walker's, like I mentioned earlier, a bulbous bear, but Otis has done extremely well for himself again this year.
Two great stories, two great bears. I think it's going to be a very exciting Fat Bear Tuesday.
Yeah, and the polls for that will open tomorrow at noon Eastern Time, 9 a.m. Pacific. So please go to fatbearweek.org and vote. And if you haven't voted today, it looks like Otis is going to win. But again, there's no guarantee of that. So if we get enough people voting for his competition today, 812, then maybe things could change. You never know. But Otis is a favorite of many people and has been a favorite for many years. So right now it looks like he's going to sail into the Fat Bear Week finale versus his rival in real life for fishing spots in the Far Pole of Brooks Falls, number 151. And vote for those bears over at fatbearweek.org. And if you want to, you can campaign for your choice for fattest bear of the year. Drop those comments in the chat below the live camera feed. Create campaign posters if you want to, and please be kind to one another. Remember, this is a friendly competition, and the bears don't receive any reward for winning Fat Bear Week except our admiration. So Otis might be number 480 in the bear monitoring database, but in a lot of people's minds, he's number 1 in our hearts. Naomi, it's been great to talk with you today. As we conclude Fat Bear Week here, coming up tomorrow, what do we have in store for our audience?
Well, we're going to recap the contest. We have a live chat at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And Rangers Leon, Cheryl, and I will join Mike for a lively discussion about the bears of Fat Bear Week.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that, and it should be a fun broadcast. We'll talk more about the road to Fat Bear Week, some of the individual bears that took part in Fat Bear Week, and then also we will recap a little bit of the summer season overall and how that played out. So thanks for joining us in this broadcast today as you enjoy this final scene of a bear scavenging some dead salmon in the lower river. My name is Mike FITZ with Explore.org. My co-host for today's play-by-play was Ranger Naomi Boak from Katmai National Park. And thanks to the National Park Service for partnering with Explore.org to help make these webcams a reality. And thanks to our camera operators who give us these wonderful views of the webcams. And then also thanks to our audience who have been.
Mike, I'm a huge bear fan, and having you explain things is such a special thing. What made this bear season so unique to you? What was so special about it? Mike, I'm a huge bear fan, and having you explain things is such a special thing. Mike, I'm a huge bear fan, and having you explain things is such a special thing. What made this bear season so unique to you? What was so special about it?
This year There were many things. It's kind of hard to choose, honestly. But this year, with the exceptional amount of salmon that returned to Brooks River, I think that really.
Mike, I'm a huge bear fan, and having you explain things is such a special thing. What made this bear season so unique to you? What was so special about it?